Hey guys, tonight is really a night. The kind of night where the air feels heavy with the smell of rain far away and the faint hum of your room mixes with the sound of your own breath. You're here to drift, and tonight's drift takes you to a world of jeweled palaces, restless princes, and the uneasy feeling that someone might be sharpening a dagger in the shadows. We're stepping into the life of a man who began as a prince barely tolerated by his own family, and who would one day become Ashoka the Great. But hold on before the greatness. There's plenty of family drama power games, and a fair bit of you probably won't survive this tension. Support us by liking this video and subscribing, so we can keep bringing you calm, comforting stories every night. Now close your eyes, listen closely, and let this gentle story ease you into a peaceful slumber. And while you're here, maybe drop a comment telling us your location and what time it is where you are, or share how you're feeling right now. Let it out, because your worries are a little lighter when you hand them over to the night. Maybe pull a blanket a little tighter around you. Listen to the quiet sounds of your room and prepare to drift peacefully into our tale. You pad barefoot down the polished corridors of Pataliputra's royal palace, the polished stone cool against your soles. The torchlight flickers, throwing long shadows across carved pillars, the kind of shadows that seem to lean in to eavesdrop. You are Ashoka, a young prince in the Maurya dynasty, grandson of Chandragupta, Maurya founder of the empire and son of Bindusara, the current emperor. That sounds impressive on a scroll, but in reality, you're somewhere around the 4th or 5th in line for the throne, depending on which cousin your father's favor currently tilts toward. In royal politics, you might as well be 10th in line, one poisoned mango away from relevance. You've heard the whispers about yourself. Some call you the overlooked one, others the dangerous one. You're broad-shouldered, quick-tempered, and if your fencing instructor is to be believed, a little too eager to finish a practice duel. But in a court teeming with silken robes and soft words, your sharp edges make you stand out. Some ministers admire your decisiveness. Others see it as a warning sign. The palace is a place of scent, sandalwood, incense curling in the air, the faint tang of ghee from the kitchens, the iron smell of the armory when you pass it. Every hallway holds its own intrigues. You learn quickly to read faces like scrolls, the tight smile of a minister hiding bad news, the quick downward glance of a servant carrying a rumor, the wary pause before someone mentions your name. Even as a teenager, you already understand survival. Here is less about who holds the sharpest sword and more about who can stand still without being seen when the political arrows start flying. Yet there's a restless drumbeat inside you. You're not content to be a background prince. You train harder than your brothers. Your sword strikes are crisp and merciless. Your aim with a bow can split a mango on a swaying rope. You ride horses until their flanks foam, urging them faster, always faster, as if you could outrun the feeling of being underestimated. Mainstream historians note that your father, Bindusara, ruled an empire stretching from the Hindu Kush to Bengal, but within that vastness, you were just one of many princely ornaments in the royal jewelry box. But here's the quirky tidbit. You weren't much for silk and jewels. You were known to wander palace corridors in plain soldier's garb, sometimes even disguising yourself to mingle with common guards. It made you unpredictable. And unpredictability is as good as armor in the Game of Thrones. Historians still argue whether your early restlessness came from genuine ambition or the simmering knowledge that without proving yourself, you might fade into the royal wallpaper. Either way, you're always listening for the call to action. That call would come soon enough, but in a form far bloodier than you could have guessed. One evening, you stand on the palace balcony, the Ganges glimmering like liquid silver in the distance. Somewhere down there, traders from distant lands are unloading goods, pepper from the south, horses from the west, fine silks from beyond the mountains. You breathe in the humid air and feel the weight of the empire pressing in on you. You want to be more than just a footnote in its story. You want to carve your name so deeply into its heart that no one can erase it. And if it takes a little blood to do it, well, in this world, that's just the price of greatness. The call to prove yourself doesn't arrive in the form of a polite summons. It crashes into your life like a war drum. The news comes before dawn, carried by a dusty messenger whose horse looks like it's been chased by demons' trouble in the western provinces. One of your father's governors has been assassinated, and tribal warlords are snapping up territory like it's on clearance sale. Your father doesn't look at you directly when the council gathers. He just says, someone must go to put this in order. The air in the throne room tightens, ministers shuffling, princes looking anywhere but your face. Finally, someone mutters your name. There's a small ripple, half surprise, half relief, that it isn't them. And so, with a rustle of silk and the clink of bronze, your chance arrives. The first real campaign of your life. You're given a modest force archers with bows the size of small trees, grim-faced infantry with spears worn smooth from used cavalry, whose horses seem bred from pure muscle and suspicion. You ride west dust curling behind you, the scent of sun-baked earth mixing with leather sweat and oil from your weapons. Villages stare as you pass, women holding children, closed men watching with eyes that measure your worth before your sword is even drawn. The first real clash comes sooner than expected. The warlord scouts appear on a rocky rise, their armor piecemeal, their eyes bright with the prospect of killing a prince. They vanish as quickly as they came, and by nightfall, their main force is at your doorstep. In the moon's pale light you give the order. Arrows arc into the sky like black rain, and the night explodes with screams and the ring of steel. You don't hang back like a pampered royal. You're in the thick of it. Your blade finding the gaps in armor, your shield absorbing blows that would have sent lesser men to the ground. The fighting is brutal. The smell, gods. The smell sweat, blood-churned earth, and that strange metallic tang that means someone nearby just died. Your men rally around you, heartened by your ferocity. By dawn, the warlord's camp is burning, his banners trampled in the mud. The campaign continues like that for weeks. One stronghold after another falls to you, some by siege, others by sheer audacity. At a riverside fort, you wade through waist-deep water at night, creeping past sleeping guards to open the gates from within. Another time, you trick an enemy chieftain into meeting under the pretense of negotiation, then take him hostage in front of his own men. Mainstream history remembers you as a capable commander. Even in your early years, the quirky tidbit. You supposedly had a habit of riding into battle without the full ceremonial armor, wearing just a breastplate over your plain tunic, daring your enemies to target you. It wasn't bravado for show. It was a calculated way to ignite your men's courage and unnerve your foes. Yet there's a shadow to your victories. You don't spare rebels. Villages suspected of aiding your enemies are burned. Men of fighting age are executed without trial. Word spreads quickly. Prince Ashoka is not one to cross. It's efficient, yes, but it leaves a bitter taste on the wind. Historians still argue whether these early campaigns were where your so-called cruel Ashoka reputation was born, or whether court rivals later exaggerated your ruthlessness to keep you from the throne. But as your army carves deeper into enemy territory, the truth is clear to you. Fear is a weapon, and you are learning to wield it well. When at last you return to Pataliputra, The empire's capital, you're not the overlooked prince anymore. You ride through the gates at the head of your war-hardened troops, banners snapping in the wind. The common folk cheer some from genuine relief others, because cheering is safer than not. Your father greets you in the great hall with a nod that's almost pride. It's the first time you felt his gaze linger on you, weighing your worth. You've shown you can crush rebellion. Now you wait for the next summons, knowing it will come and knowing you will answer it without hesitation. Because this was only the proving ground. The real climb to power hasn't even begun. The next test isn't another battlefield in the wilderness. It's a throne room in miniature. Your father sends you east, far from the scheming heartbeat of Pataliputra, to rule as the governor of Ujjain. It sounds like a promotion. In reality, it's a trial. Ujjain isn't some backwater village where you can stomp your foot and have the walls tremble. It's a jewel of the empire, a crossroads for traders coming from the west, caravans from the north and river barges from the south. Its markets spill over with Persian silks, Arabian horses, Greek wines and spices that smell like both heaven and possible indigestion. When you arrive, the streets are buzzing. Merchants shout prices in a dozen languages, cows wander stubbornly through the crowd, and somewhere in the distance, a temple bell tolls in slow hypnotic rhythm. The air is thick with the scent of cardamom, sandalwood, and roasting meat. You breathe it in and realize this isn't war. This is a chessboard where the pieces have minds of their own. You set up in the governor's palace, a fine building with carved stone verandas, silk canopies, and gardens watered by ingenious canals. From here, you watch and learn. Ujjain is rich, but rich cities are like spoiled children. They're charming until you tell them no. Your first weeks are filled with disputes. Merchant guilds accusing each other of smuggling farmers, protesting new taxes. Priests insisting on exemptions for holy grain shipments. Everyone wants something, and everyone wants it now. You quickly learn that the soft power of gold and trade is just as sharp as a sword, sometimes sharper. And then there's the shadow world. Spies slink in the taverns, listening for whispers of rebellion. You make discreet payments to certain innkeepers who always seem to know more than they should. You also have your own network former soldiers who owe you favors, informants, who can tell you which merchant is secretly funding a rival faction. Mainstream history remembers you as an effective governor here, the quirky tidbit. You supposedly had a secret passage from your chambers leading directly into the city's bazaar, allowing you to slip out in plain clothes and watch the people without being noticed. The story goes that once in disguise, you ended up judging a street wrestling contest and awarding the winner with your own ring. Not everyone appreciates your methods. Some Brahmin priests grumble that you're too quick to punish temple officials who meddle in trade disputes. The merchant elite mutter that you're unpredictable, sometimes favoring the smallest street vendor, sometimes squeezing the wealthiest guild until they squeak. But your approach works. Revenue climbs, crime drops, and perhaps most importantly, Ujjain stays loyal. Historians still argue whether your success here was due to genuine administrative skill or the lingering fear from your earlier military reputation. Either way, your name starts traveling along the trade routes, embroidered into stories told in caravan camps and temple courtyards. The Prince of Ujjain is spoken of with a mix of respect and caution. Then in the middle of this relatively smooth governance, trouble finds you in the form of rebellion in a neighboring province. The unrest isn't directly your responsibility, but you know instability spreads like monsoon water. It seeps into every crack it can find. You ride out with a small force to assist, and once again, you lead from the front. The rebellion collapses within days, and though the rebels had hoped for mercy, they find you still favor a certain swiftness in justice. Back in Ujjain, you can feel the city watching you differently now. You're no longer just a governor sent by the emperor. You're the emperor's sword, sheathed but visible. Even those who don't like you have to admit you've kept the city safe, its markets open, and its coffers full. When the recall order comes from Pataliputra, you pack your things slowly, knowing this posting has done exactly what your father intended. It has proven you can rule, not just conquer. And yet, you also know the capital will test you harder than any market squabble or desert skirmish. The road home lies ahead, lined with both opportunity and danger, and you've learned enough to know that in the Mauryan court, they often arrive together. You return to Pataliputra with the swagger of someone who survived both the battlefield and the bazaar, but the palace you left behind feels colder now. Word travels fast in an empire, and your victories both in war and in governance have turned you from the overlooked prince into the dangerously capable one. And in a royal court, capable is just another word for threat. The capital hums with gossip. You catch fragments in the corridors Ashoka is too ambitious. Bindusara favors him. No, he fears him. The truth. Your father is aging. His health flickers like an oil lamp in a draught. And when the emperor grows weak, the vultures gather, except here the vultures wear silk and smile as they circle. Your elder brothers are not subtle. One hosts endless feasts for ministers, plying them with wine and gifts. Another showers the army's top generals with gold bracelets. A third whispers in your father's ear about your supposed cruelty, suggesting ever so gently that perhaps you shouldn't be entrusted with the empire. Historians still argue whether these rumors were entirely political invention, or if your early campaigns gave them just enough truth to stick. You play the game in your own way. You keep your allies close, dining with generals who fought under you, rewarding merchants who funded your campaigns, listening to Brahmin advisors who respect your decisiveness. You don't try to charm the court. You simply remind it quietly that you're not a man easily removed. Then the emperor falls ill. The air in the palace shifts instantly. Courtiers move faster but speak softer. Guards are doubled at certain doors. Official proclamations are delayed. You know what's coming, a scramble for the throne, where the only rule is to not be the last one standing without a crown. One night, your mother sends for you in secret. Her voice is low and urgent, and they will move against you, she says, eyes flicking toward the shadowed corners as if someone might be listening. If your father dies before you act, the throne will be beyond your reach. It's not advice, it's a warning. The days blur into tense strategy. You secure the loyalty of the city's garrison. You quietly reinforce the gates leading into the palace quarter. You call in debts from men who owe you their rank or their life. And yes, you send messages coded careful to allies in the provinces who can march if called. Mainstream history records what happens next in vague, polite terms. Ashoka emerged victorious from the succession dispute. The quirky tidbit. In one popular folk version, you supposedly confronted a key rival brother in the palace gardens, and after a tense exchange over a game of dice, he vanished from court entirely, some say into exile, others into a shallow grave. Historians still debate the exact body count of your rise. Some say you eliminated only the most dangerous claimants. Others claim you cleared the path so thoroughly that even distant cousins started practicing humility overnight. What no one disputes is that when your father finally dies, the throne doesn't so much fall into your lap as it does find itself surrounded by your loyal guards. You are crowned emperor in a ceremony thick with incense and politics. Brahmins chant hymns while ministers bow low, some in genuine fealty, others because they like their heads attached. As the golden crown touches your brow, you feel the enormity of it, not just the power, but the responsibility, the weight of millions of lives now, depending on your word. And yet, somewhere beneath the ceremonial gravity, you feel a surge of satisfaction. You've played the game and you've won. The restless prince has become the ruler of the greatest empire in India. But power has a way of asking for more, and soon your gaze will turn toward a stubborn kingdom whose defiance will change the course of your life forever. The stubborn kingdom is called Kalinga, and it is not impressed by you. You've heard its name whispered in council meetings for years, a coastal realm on the eastern seaboard, wealthy from maritime trade, fiercely independent, and proud enough to tell the Mauryan Empire exactly where it can shove its imperial decrees. Your predecessors had left it alone, preferring to let trade flow without the expense of war. But now you are emperor, and you have a different philosophy. Partly, it's strategic. Kalinga sits on the main land route between the Mauryan heartland and the southern kingdoms. Its harbours could serve as launching points for trade ships or warships heading east towards Southeast Asia. And partly it's personal. Kalinga has never once acknowledged Mauryan supremacy. They've treated your empire's envoys as bothersome relatives who show up uninvited and drink all the good wine. So you send them a message. The polite version is join us and prosper. And the version your generals hear is Kalinga will kneel. They do not kneel. They respond with a letter so dripping in royal condescension it could stain parchment forever. Historians still argue over whether this was a tactical bluff or genuine arrogance, but the effect is the same. You decide publicly that enough is enough. Privately, you know that conquering Kalinga will send a message to every province vassal, and would-be rebel Ashoka does not tolerate defiance, and so you begin preparations. The army you assemble is immense even by Mauryan standards. War elephants with armor-plated foreheads and tusk blades that gleam in the sun. Cavalry squadrons whose horses snort steam in the early morning chill. Infantry in ranks so deep they look like moving forests of spears. Siege engines that could knock down city gates with a single crash. The march to Kalinga is long and heavy with anticipation. Villages along the route pour out to watch the tide of your army flow past the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of oiled weapons. The soldiers sing marching chants, the deep drums booming like the heartbeat of the empire itself. When you reach Kalinga's borders, you find them ready for you. Their walls are high, their watchtowers bristling with archers. Their warriors wear brightly painted armor, their shields lacquered to shine in the sun. They have dug ditches, built palisades, and positioned skirmishers in the surrounding hills. This will not be a quick campaign. Your first engagement is a probing strike testing their defenses. Your troops push forward under a hail of arrows, finding the enemy's front line stubborn and unyielding. Even your elephants, usually the bulldozers of war, meet resistance from Kalinga's disciplined ranks. You pull back, but you've seen enough. You know they won't be intimidated into surrender. Mainstream history says you approached the Kalinga campaign with your full military might and ruthless efficiency. The quirky tidbit: according to some court gossip, you personally ordered your war elephants to be decorated with crimson silk and gold bells before the decisive battle, not for intimidation, but because you believed it would make them look like the gods of war had arrived. Historians still argue whether Kalinga's stubborn resistance was born of patriotism necessity, or simply an unwillingness to be ruled by yet another distant monarch. Whatever their reason, their defiance stirs something in you, a flicker of respect, and a matching flicker of determination to grind them into history. So you set your jaw and prepare for the storm to come. You will have Kalinga no matter the cost, and when that cost is paid, you will never again be the same man. The storm comes with the sound of war drums rolling like thunder across the coastal plains. The air is thick, hot and heavy, sticky with the scent of salt from the nearby sea, mingled with the sharp metallic tang of oiled blades. It is the day of reckoning. Kalinga will either bow or break. You deploy your forces in waves. First, the archers loosing black clouds of arrows that blot out the sun. The hiss of their flight is followed by the sharp, sickening thud of impact. Then the infantry advances, shields, locked spears bristling forward like the quills of a furious porcupine. Kalinga fights back with a ferocity that surprises even you. Their own archers rain death from the walls, their infantry charging out in disciplined formations to meet your lines head-on. They know every hill, every hidden gully, and when they fall back, it is only to lure you into narrow passes where your larger numbers are less useful. The first major breach comes at the southern gate. Your war elephants, clad in iron and crimson silk, smash forward. Their massive heads batter the gate's tusk blades, cleaving through defenders. The wood splinters, the gate crashes inward, and your soldiers pour in with a roar. Street fighting follows, messy, close and relentless. Every corner hides an ambush, every alley a desperate last stand. You stride into the fray, yourself sword in hand, the air so thick with dust and smoke it clings to your tongue. You cut down one defender, then another, your body moving almost without conscious thought. By sunset, the city is yours. But the victory tastes like ashes. The bodies are everywhere, warriors, merchants, farmers, children. Kalinga's proud defiance has been answered with annihilation. The chronicles will later record a figure so large, it seems almost impossible, over 100,000 dead, with tens of thousands more taken prisoner. Historians still argue whether these numbers are exact or exaggerated, but even the lowest estimates paint the streets red. The smell is overwhelming. Burned wood, sweat, blood, and the sickly sweet odor of death settling into the humid air. You fought many battles, but never one where victory feels like this. The quirky tidbit. Folk tradition says that after the battle, you wandered into a ruined temple where the stone floor was slick with blood, and you accidentally stepped into a small pool of it. You stared at your footprint for a long time, saying nothing before walking away without another word. That night, you sit alone in your tent, the sounds of celebration muffled beyond the canvas walls. You can hear your officers laughing, the clink of drinking cups, the occasional cheer. But you're not drinking. You're staring at your hands. You can't remember how many lives they've taken today, only that it was too many. The coastal wind rattles the tent flaps, carrying in the scent of the sea and smoke. You try to sleep, but the images keep returning, faces twisted in terror, the limp forms of children clutched by lifeless mothers, the eerie silence that falls after the screaming stops. You have conquered Kalinga. The empire is bigger than ever, your place in history assured. And yet, something deep inside you has begun to crack. You ride back from Kalinga in triumph, or at least that's what the official story says. The banners are raised, the army's drums beat steady, and the roads are lined with cheering citizens who toss flower petals as you pass. But the truth is quieter, heavier. You carry Kalinga with you not as a jewel in your crown, but as a shadow that lengthens with every mile. In the daytime you keep your face composed, nodding to crowds returning salutes from your officers. At night, when the campfires burn low, you lie awake under the canopy of the sky and see Kalinga's streets again. You hear the screams, you smell the smoke. Sleep comes only in restless fragments, and when it does, it brings dreams so vivid you wake with the taste of ash in your mouth. The palace welcomes you with ceremony. Gold-threaded carpets unroll beneath your feet, ministers bow low, the Brahmins chant blessings in long, winding verses. But their voices seem far away. Even the great hall, usually alive with murmured intrigue, feels like a painted backdrop, thin and unreal. One evening, while the court is busy congratulating itself on your magnificent victory, you slip away to the gardens. The air is cool here, scented with jasmine and damp earth. You walk alone under the moonlight, the gravel crunching softly beneath your sandals. And there, by the lotus pond, you hear a sound that stops you in your tracks. Laughter. A pair of young boys are chasing each other around the pond, their bare feet splashing in the shallows. Their joy is simple, unguarded. For a moment you just watch them, but then without warning your mind shifts, and you see not these boys, but the children of Kalinga, running not for play, but for their lives. You blink hard, and they're gone, replaced by the real children, oblivious to the emperor standing in the shadows. Historians still argue whether your change began here in the garden, or whether it had already been growing like a hairline crack in glass since the first day of the campaign. But from this point on, something is undeniably different. You begin avoiding the grand feasts. The music, the dancers, the endless parade of jeweled goblets. It all feels hollow. Instead, you spend more time alone, or in the company of those who ask nothing of you. Servants whisper that the emperor has grown strange, wandering the palace grounds at night, stopping to watch ants dismantle a crumb of bread, or standing for long minutes at the aviary, following the slow arc of a bird's flight. The quirky tidbit court gossip claims that once you ordered a palace guard to escort a wounded dove to the royal physician because you couldn't stand the sight of its broken wing. The bird survived. The guard apparently needed a day to recover from the shock of being asked to treat a pigeon like a visiting dignitary, and yet your duties do not disappear. Reports arrive daily from the provinces. Envoys come bearing gifts and requests. Disputes must be judged, criminals sentenced, taxes allocated. But now you find yourself lingering over decisions, especially those involving life and death. You no longer sign execution orders without reading every detail, and sometimes you refuse them outright. The empire sees an emperor return from glorious conquest. You see a man standing at the edge of a cliff, peering into a place he never imagined, an abyss where victory looks a lot like loss. And in the quiet hours of the night, you begin to wonder if the blood on your hands can ever truly be washed away. The restlessness inside you finally pushes you beyond the palace walls. One morning before the sun lifts the mist from the Ganges, you take a small escort and ride into the countryside. You tell the guards it's for inspection of the outer estates, but in truth, you're looking for something you can't quite name. You pass through quiet villages where women grind grain in courtyards, children chase goats down dusty lanes, and old men sit in the shade of banyan trees, gossiping as they have for decades. The smells are honest here: wood smoke, earth after dew, the faint sweetness of drying grain. It is a far cry from the perfumed halls of Pataliputra. Your path leads you to a small monastery, little more than whitewashed walls and a tiled roof that sags slightly at the edges. A group of monks in saffron robes is sweeping the courtyard. They move slowly, deliberately, as though every motion carries weight. One of them, a man whose head gleams smooth in the sunlight, notices you. He doesn't bow low like courtiers do. He simply inclines his head, calm as still water. You dismount and approach. He offers you water from a clay jug, and you drink, feeling the coolness slide down your throat. It's such a simple act, yet it quiets something in you. You ask his name. He says it softly. You ask what they do here. He tells you, we seek to walk in harmony with the Dharma. That word Dharma settles in your mind like a pebble dropped into a pond. You've heard it before in Brahmin prayers, in legal decrees. But here it sounds different. You stay longer than intended. The monk explains nothing directly, yet everything he says feels like an answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. He speaks of compassion not as an ornament for the weak, but as the strongest law of all, of how every act ripples outward, touching lives you will never see. Mainstream history says that after Kalinga, you sought the council of Buddhist monks and began studying their teachings, the quirky tidbit. There's a folk tale that you once asked a monk how to govern well, and he simply handed you a bowl of water filled to the brim, saying, "Govern. As you carry this, do not spill." You rode home with that bowl in your hands, and not a drop was lost. Historians still argue whether your turn toward Dharma was an instant conversion or a gradual awakening. But after that meeting, you begin to visit monasteries more often. You talk to wandering ascetics, Jain scholars, even Brahmin philosophers who emphasize compassion over ritual. You listen, and slowly your view shifts. You start to see your empire not as a map to be expanded, but as a vast garden, one you've trampled in your haste to plant your flag. You realize the gardeners you've ignored, the farmers, the merchants, the healers, the storytellers. You see how fragile it all is, how easily it withers under the shadow of war. One night back in the palace, you stand on the balcony and watch the moonlight spill across the city. You think of Kalinga again, not the battlefield, but what it could have been, a thriving part of the empire without the rivers of blood. And you begin to wonder, could an emperor conquer without a sword? The answer comes to you one morning like a bird alighting on your windowsill, quiet, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. You decide for the first time in your reign to declare something not about expansion, not about taxes, not about glory, but about restraint. You summon your ministers to the council hall. The chamber smells faintly of sandalwood parchment and the faint tang of ink from the scribe's brushes. Courtiers gather in a ring around you, their silks rustling like restless leaves. You stand feeling their eyes and speak with a clarity that stills the room. There will be no more wars of conquest, you say. The sword will rest. The empire will grow only in peace. The silence afterward is almost comic. One general blinks so hard you wonder if he's trying to bat the words away. A minister coughs into his sleeve, as though you've told a joke no one dares laugh at, but you continue your voice steady. From this day our victories will be in compassion, justice, and the welfare of our people. Historians still argue whether this was a calculated political move to stabilize the empire or a genuine moral awakening. But you know it is both. You have seen the cost of war, and you have decided it is too high. You begin putting the new philosophy into practice immediately. The army, still formidable, is turned inward toward building roads, maintaining order, and protecting trade caravans, instead of chasing new territories. Fortresses that once guarded contested borders now shelter traveling merchants. Soldiers plant trees along the great highways to shade weary travelers. The quirky tidbit folk tradition says you even issued an edict forbidding the unnecessary slaughter of animals for royal banquets, though it's unclear whether this made the cooks curse your name or simply get very creative with lentils. Your new policy isn't without critics. Some generals grumble that the empire will grow soft without the discipline of war. Certain ministers fear that without fresh conquests, the treasury will dwindle. But others, especially the common people, begin to whisper that the emperor has a new kind of strength, one that doesn't bleed them dry. In public audiences, you speak differently now. You no longer boast of the empire's size, but of its stability. You point to the harvest, to the bustling markets, to the fact that villages untouched by war can pass down their homes to their children. You remind people that peace is not weakness, it is the soil in which everything good can grow. Mainstream history records your declaration as a turning point in the Mauryan Empire's character. The military machine that had once crushed kingdoms now became a guardian of prosperity. But it wasn't just the empire that was changing, it was you. One evening, you walk the palace gardens under the soft glow of oil lamps. The air hums with crickets. Somewhere nearby, a night-blooming flower unfurls its petals into the darkness. You pause, listening to the faint trickle of a fountain, and feel an unfamiliar lightness in your chest. It's the weight of knowing you've chosen the path fewer kings ever dare to walk. And though you don't yet realize it, this decision will be the seed from which your greatest works will grow. The decision to abandon conquest leaves you with a new question. If you are not building an empire through war, how do you build it at all? The answer, it turns out, is a different kind of army. One made not of soldiers, but of envoys, healers, scholars, and builders. You call your council again, but this time the mood is less tense. Instead of maps marked with enemy fortresses, the table is spread with scrolls outlining trade routes, medicinal herb inventories, plans for irrigation canals. You trace your finger along the silk inclines of a proposed highway, stretching from the western mountains all the way to the Bay of Bengal. You approve it on the spot. Your first great mission is to knit the empire together, with roads broad, straight, well-paved arteries of commerce and communication. Caravans can travel faster, soldiers can respond to trouble more quickly, and ordinary people can move with a freedom they've never known. At every 10-mile interval, you establish rest houses stocked with water, grain, and shelter from the monsoon. You send out physicians trained in both the ancient Ayurvedic tradition and new herbal remedies brought by foreign traders. They carry medicine chests instead of spears traveling into the farthest villages. You fund the planting of medicinal gardens in towns so remedies can be grown locally. The quirky tidbit folk legend says you even dispatched a group of doctors to treat sick elephants in the royal stables, complete with little clay jars of ointment and honey-mixed tonics. Whether or not it's true, it's exactly the kind of story people like to believe about the new Ashoka. Your envoys cross borders not to conquer, but to connect. You send gifts to neighboring kingdoms, fine cotton cloth, sandalwood carvings, even Buddhist texts written in delicate gold script. Some are diplomatic gestures, others seeds of influence. Your reach grows not by seizing territory, but by making allies. Mainstream history records that you sent emissaries far beyond India's borders to Sri Lanka, to Central Asia, and astonishingly, even to the Greek kingdoms left behind by Alexander the Great's successors. Some reports claim your messengers reached as far as Egypt. Historians still debate how much of this is literal truth, but your own scribes write of these missions with pride. You also set your gaze inward. The cities hum with activity. You order the cleaning and widening of main streets, the repair of drainage canals, the construction of public wells. In rural districts, you dispatch engineers to design water storage systems so farmers can survive the dry season without losing their crops. There is a different kind of satisfaction in this work. When you once stood on the ramparts of conquered cities, you saw fear in the eyes below. Now, as you ride through the empire, you see something else, faces lit with curiosity, sometimes even gratitude. One afternoon, you pause in a market town to watch a group of children run laughing toward a newly built water well. Their mothers follow, carrying brass pots that shine in the sunlight. As the first bucket comes up dripping and heavy, the children cheer like they've been given treasure. You realize, in a way, they have. Historians still argue whether this transformation was complete conviction or clever statecraft. But you no longer care what they think. You have discovered a truth no battlefield could teach. Power is not just in what you can take, it is in what you can give. And from this revelation will rise your most enduring symbols, monuments, not to your victories, but to your promises. The monuments begin as simple markers, stone slabs bearing your decrees, so that even the most remote village can hear the emperor's voice. But soon you realize they can be more than notices. They can be a conversation between ruler and people, carved in words that outlast both you and your empire. You commission artisans and stonemasons to shape massive pillars from gleaming sandstone. Each one is to be smoothed until it reflects sunlight, then crowned with an animal capital: lions with fierce, watchful eyes, elephants, mid-stride bulls standing proud. These are not just decoration. They are symbols of strength and guardianship. Your scribes skilled in the Brahmi and Kharosti scripts inscribe your new laws and principles into the stone. The language is simple, direct, meant for farmers, traders, and monks alike. You write of compassion for all living things, the importance of truth, the duty to care for one's parents, the necessity of fairness in judgment. You even instruct that shade trees and wells be planted for the comfort of travelers, whether rich or poor. The quirky tidbit folk tradition claims that on one pillar, you ordered an edict reminding people to be kind to servants, and directly beneath it, the stonemason cheekily carved a servant's smiling face. No one knows if it was an inside joke or official whimsy, but it's said you laughed when you saw it. Mainstream history tells us these pillars were set across the length and breadth of your empire, in cities, at crossroads, near temples, even deep in rural heartlands. Historians still debate whether every surviving pillar truly belongs to your reign, or whether later kings imitated your style. But there is no doubt that their voice is yours, firm, compassionate, utterly clear. You also turn to rock edicts, carving your words into the faces of cliffs and hillsides, where travelers cannot miss them. On one such edict, you openly express your regret for the bloodshed in Kalinga, and vow never to wage such a war again. This is not the usual rhetoric of kings. It is a confession, one you place in the open, for all to read. You travel to inspect some of these works yourself. Standing at the base of a freshly raised pillar, you run your hand over the warm stone. You can almost feel the weight of the words inside it, like seeds pressed into the earth, waiting for the right season to grow. In the villages, people begin to quote your edicts in everyday conversation. Merchants cite them in trade disputes. Teachers recite them to children in open courtyards. Monks carry the words to distant lands, where they are repeated in languages you will never speak. Historians still argue whether these pillars were primarily moral guides or clever tools of governance, binding the empire together under a shared code. For you, they are both. They are your legacy in stone, a promise that even when your voice falls silent, your principles will stand. And as you watch the latest pillar rise against the blue sky, you realize that your reign will be remembered not just for the battles you fought, but for the truths you chose to carve into the heart of the land. You soon discover that diplomacy under a banyan tree can be far more satisfying than diplomacy in a marble-floored throne room. In the shade of those sprawling branches, the air cool and fragrant with the faint sweetness of blossoms, people seem more willing to speak plainly and more willing to listen. So you start inviting rival chieftains, restless governors, and neighboring rulers to meet you in the open air. No columns, no tapestries, no stiff court etiquette. Just mats spread on the grass, clay cups of cool water, and a table, or sometimes just a cloth laden with fruit, rice, and fragrant curries. When the first such gathering takes place, your guests are wary. They arrive with guards in tow, eyes scanning the grove as though expecting an ambush. But as the hours pass, their shoulders ease. They share food. They tell hunting stories. They argue about horse breeding. By the time the meal ends, the talk of war has quietly dissolved into talk of trade, the quirky tidbit. One popular tale says that at one such feast, a local chieftain challenged you to a mango eating contest. You supposedly lost on purpose just to watch him puff up with pride and brag about it to his people for years. That tiny surrender bought you more loyalty than any treaty could have. Mainstream history notes that your reign saw unusually long stretches of stability along previously volatile borders. Historians still debate whether this was purely due to your moral reforms, or whether your informal diplomacy played the greater role. You know the truth, a shared meal under a tree can dissolve decades of mistrust. You make a habit of bringing gifts tailored to each guest fine cloth, for a queen, who admires weaving a skilled stonemason, for a chieftain who wants a new temple, rare medicinal herbs, for an aging ruler plagued by joint pain. None of it is grand enough to seem like a bribe, but each is personal enough to be remembered. One afternoon, as you sit cross-legged beneath the banyan canopy, a cool breeze stirring the edges of your robe, you watch two governors who once refused to speak to each other laughing over a shared joke. The dappled sunlight falls across their faces, and for a moment you see your empire not as a map of borders, but as a web of relationships, each thread strengthened by patience, generosity, and a little well-timed humor. Historians still argue whether your reputation as a benevolent ruler was built more on stone edicts or on these quiet shaded meetings. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Both grew from the same conviction that the most enduring power is the kind that invites people to sit, eat, and see each other as human. And as the afternoon light fades, the banyan leaves whisper overhead like a chorus of unseen voices, carrying your new kind of statecraft deeper into the heart of your empire. Once you've sown peace among rulers and governors, your gaze turns to the people themselves. You begin to imagine an empire where no one suffers simply because they were born in the wrong village, or into the wrong family, or on the wrong side of the monsoon rains. So you set about building what no Marian ruler before you ever dared attempt, a kind of welfare state, woven not with silks, but with wells roads, shelters, and food. You send orders to the provinces. Hospitals must be established in every major town open to all rich poor foreign native. The physicians are paid from the royal treasury, and medicine is free. It sounds like a dream to your ministers and a nightmare to the accountants. But you insist. You've seen enough broken bodies left to fate on battlefields. Now you want healing to be the empire's new legacy. Mainstream history confirms that you funded both human and animal hospitals. The quirky tidbit, you even ordered the creation of veterinary clinics for livestock and working animals, complete with treatments for colic in horses and herbal balms for the cracked feet of oxen. In an agrarian empire that made you wildly popular with farmers. Along the roads you have wells dug at regular intervals, shaded by newly planted banyan and mango trees. Every 50 miles you erect caravanserais roadside shelters, where merchants, pilgrims, and wandering storytellers can sleep without fear of thieves or wild animals. And because you can't resist adding a touch of kindness to practicality, you order groves of mango trees planted beside them. Free fruit for the weary traveller. Some groves still carry your name in folk songs centuries later. Historians still debate whether these measures were purely altruistic or a clever way to keep your subjects loyal and your trade routes safe. But you know that a well-fed, healthy, and rested population is far harder to stir into rebellion. You also reform justice for common people. You instruct judges to travel the countryside, holding open hearings, so farmers don't have to abandon their fields to bring a complaint to the capital. You create a system of appeals so that even a low-born shepherd can, in theory, have his case heard by the emperor himself. And when you learn of a cruel punishment handed down for a petty theft, You overturn it, declaring that justice without compassion is nothing but another form of tyranny. One morning, on an inspection tour, you stop at a small village hospital. The smell of crushed herbs hangs in the air, mingled with wood smoke from the cooking fires. You watch a healer bind a boy's arm in a clean linen bandage and hand him a little pouch of turmeric powder for the swelling. His mother bows low, eyes wet with gratitude. It's a quiet moment, but it anchors something in you. This is what it means to rule well. As you ride away, the wind carries the scent of mango blossoms from a grove you ordered, planted the year before. You smile, thinking of the travelers who will one day sit in that shade, eat the sweet fruit, and never know the emperor's name, only that the road was kind to them. Peace at home gives you the freedom to think bigger, beyond your empire's borders, beyond its religions, beyond the boundaries most rulers never even imagine crossing. You've embraced the Dharma, but you've learned that compassion isn't about making everyone follow your path. It's about protecting the paths they already walk. So you issue a proclamation unlike any before it. Every faith in the Mauryan Empire, Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, Ajivika, and countless local traditions will be protected under your rule. Temples and shrines are to be respected. Priests, monks, and teachers of every sect are free to teach without fear of persecution. Mainstream history remembers you as a Buddhist emperor, but the quirky tidbit, you never made Buddhism the empire's official religion. Instead, you ordered public debates between scholars of different faiths, not to declare a winner, but to encourage mutual respect. One inscription even warns against glorifying one's own sect by disparaging others. For the ancient world, this was radical stuff. Your tolerance doesn't stop at your borders. You begin sending emissaries to distant lands, not soldiers, but monks, healers, and diplomats. Some travel south to Sri Lanka, carrying the Buddhist teachings to the island's royal court. Others venture west toward the Greek kingdoms that rose from the fragments of Alexander's empire. Rumors claim your envoys reached as far as Alexandria in Egypt, though historians still argue whether this is fact or romantic embellishment. You also send gifts, fine cotton cloth, dyed in rich indigo jars of perfumed oils, manuscripts, inscribed in delicate gold lettering. Each package carries not just your seal, but your message that the Mauryan Empire seeks friendship, not conquest. One afternoon, you stand on a palace balcony as a group of envoys departs for the northwest. Their pack animals are loaded with scrolls, medicine chests, and small carved statues meant for foreign temples. You watch them disappear into the dust of the road, and you wonder what conversations your name will spark in faraway courts. Historians still debate whether these missions were driven more by spiritual conviction or by a shrewd understanding of soft power. You know it's both. Every ally made without a sword strengthens your empire in ways armies never could. And perhaps one day a traveler from those distant lands will stand in your court, speaking of peace in a language you don't yet know. And when that day comes, you want the empire to be ready to answer in kind. Even the most enlightened ruler can't escape the mess of family politics. You may have turned your armies into road builders and healers, but your heirs, they have the same restless hunger you once carried, and far fewer scars to temper it. Your sons grow up in the palace surrounded by silk servants, and the intoxicating certainty that they were born to rule. They watch you hold the empire together without war and mistake your restraint for weakness. You catch them in whispered conversations with ambitious ministers, promising reforms that sound suspiciously like conquest by another name. One son, your favorite for a time, begins to grumble that your obsession with peace is dulling the empire's teeth. Another tries to position himself as the true heir by courting the generals you've set to softer duties. Historians still argue whether their discontent was natural youthful ambition or a reaction to your dramatic change in policy. Mainstream records are discreet about palace intrigue, but the quirky tidbit comes from court gossip. During a formal dinner, one of your sons supposedly tried to bait you into boasting about your victories in Kalinga, perhaps to remind the court of your warrior past. Instead, you quietly remarked, "The greatest victory is one where no one dies." Then you went back to eating your lentils. The silence that followed was delicious. The tension grows when you start talking openly about succession. You want a ruler who will protect your vision of a compassionate, stable empire. But you also know the pull of ambition is strong, and the example you once set as a younger man may have planted seeds you now regret. You begin testing your sons in subtle ways. You send one to oversee famine relief in a drought-stricken province, another to mediate a border dispute without calling in the army. The results are mixed. Some rise to the challenge. Others look for shortcuts. You can't help but measure them against your own transformation, wondering if any will ever make that leap. Historians still debate which son you truly favored in your later years. Some say you lean toward the one most devoted to Buddhist principles. Others believe you played them against each other to keep them sharp. But in quiet moments you worry. You've worked so hard to steer the empire away from the sword. Will your heir swing it the moment you're gone? One evening, you walk the palace gardens alone, the torchlight flickering over the carved stone paths. The air smells of jasmine and wet earth. You think of the banyan tree gatherings, the hospitals, the stone pillars bearing your words. You imagine them in a future where your sons have chosen differently. Will they endure, or will they be just another chapter in a long scroll of forgotten reigns? You stop beneath the old fig tree, listening to the night insects. You've built something fragile and rare, and the thought that it could vanish in a generation sits heavier on your heart than any battle ever did. The years pass, and the urgency of rule begins to soften into the rhythm of seasons. You still hold audiences, still issue decrees, but more often now, you find yourself stepping back, letting your ministers manage the endless machinery of the empire. In your younger days, you might have feared this delegation, worried that too much trust would invite betrayal. Now you see it differently. A wise ruler doesn't clutch every thread until his knuckles whiten. He weaves the pattern, then lets it hold. Your mornings are quieter. Sometimes you wake before dawn, slip out to the palace terraces, and watch the first gold light spill across the Ganges. The river moves with the same slow certainty it always has, carrying fishermen in narrow boats, the morning smoke of cooking fires drifting from their banks. The sight steadies you in a way war banners never could. You spend more hours in study. Scrolls on medicine ethics and astronomy line your private chamber. Buddhist texts are joined by treatises from Greek philosophers, tales from distant China hymns from Vedic tradition. You've learned that wisdom wears many robes, and you find pleasure in trying them all on for thought. Mainstream history often glides over this period, noting only that you withdrew somewhat from public affairs. The quirky tidbit: there's a story that during one rainy season, you became so absorbed in debating the moral dilemmas of a Buddhist parable with a visiting monk that you missed 3 council meetings in a row. Your ministers eventually came to you instead, discussing state budgets while you were still seated, cross-legged on the floor, tea cooling beside you. Historians still argue whether this retreat was deliberate, an effort to groom your chosen successor, or the natural result of age and shifting priorities. But the truth is simpler. You've begun to see the empire as a garden you've already planted. The weeds will come as they always do, but the roots are deep now. Sometimes you travel incognito disguised in a plain cotton robe just to walk among your people. In a riverside village, you sit on the low wall of a well and listen to a farmer describe the good harvest. In a busy market town, you share a sweet rice cake with a group of laughing children who have no idea they're teasing their emperor about his clumsy way of eating it. You find that these small moments feel more real than the gilded ceremonies of your court. You've lived long enough to understand that the strength of an empire isn't measured only in its armies or its monuments. It's in these fragments of everyday life that endure long after the ruler's name fades. As you return to the palace one evening, fireflies blinking like stray embers in the dark, you feel the gentle truth of it settle in your bones. You have begun to step away, not because you are weaker, but because you finally understand that letting go is part of ruling well. The call to travel begins quietly first, as a gentle longing, then as an unshakable pull. You have spent decades shaping the empire from your throne. Now you feel drawn to walk its sacred places with your own feet. You set aside the golden parasol and the endless processions. Instead, you take only a modest entourage, a few monks' trusted attendants, and enough guards to satisfy your minister's fears. The journey is not for spectacle. It is for the soul. Your first stop is Lumbini, where, according to tradition, the Buddha was born. The grove is quiet shaded by ancient trees, whose roots twist like the lines on an old monk's face. You stand beneath them, listening to the rustle of leaves, imagining the cries of a newborn carried on the same breeze centuries ago. You order the site to be marked and exempted from taxes, so pilgrims can come without burden. From there, you travel to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha is said to have attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. The air here feels different, heavy, but not oppressive. You sit cross-legged in its shade for hours, the bustle of your attendants fading, until it is just you, the whisper of wind in the leaves and the stillness inside your own chest. Mainstream history confirms these pilgrimages, but the quirky tidbit: in one village along the route, you were offered a meal of simple barley bread by a farmer's family. You ate with such visible pleasure that the story spread like wildfire, and for years afterward peasants would half-jokingly boast, "The emperor eats like we do." You continue north to Sarnath, where the Buddha first taught the Dharma. Monks gather to greet you, their saffron robes glowing like embers in the sunlight. You walk the same paths they walk, listen to their chants rising and falling like waves. You speak little here. You feel as though every stone already knows what you would say. Historians still debate whether these journeys were purely spiritual, or also a political reaffirmation of your role as a moral guide to the empire. Perhaps they were both. You are emperor and pilgrim now, roles that once seemed impossible to hold together, but that now feel like two sides of the same coin. As the months pass, the road becomes a kind of meditation. You rise before dawn, feel the chill of the morning air in your lungs, watch the horizon blush with the first light. Villagers come to greet you with garlands, musicians play flutes as you pass, and children wave shyly from behind their mothers' saris. You return their smiles. One evening, camped beside a quiet river, you watch the moon rise over the water. The reflection shimmers with every ripple, never still yet always whole. You think of your own life, how it has shifted, fractured and reformed. And for the first time in years, you feel no trace of the weight you carried from Kalinga. Only peace. You return to Pataliputra slower than you left your body, older. Your steps measured, but your mind clearer than it has been in decades. The palace rises from the horizon like a familiar dream, its carved gates and fluted columns bathed in the warm light of late afternoon. Servants bow, ministers greet you with long rehearsed speeches, but in your heart you know the road has changed you forever. In the months that follow, you work steadily, but without haste. You approve the planting of more mango groves along the southern highways. You ask for reports from hospitals and schools instead of border garrisons. You summon your stonecutters to inscribe one last series of edicts messages, not about law or discipline, but about kindness, patience, and the value of harmony among all faiths. You think often of the Kalinga you once burned, and the Kalinga you might have known. You never speak of it in court now, but the regret still threads through your actions. Whenever a province petitions for aid after a flood or a famine, you sign the relief order first, then the day's other decrees. Mainstream history will remember you as Ashoka the Great, but the quirky tidbit. According to the palace archivist, you once asked your scribes to draft an edict instructing future rulers to forgive small slights quickly, but struck it out at the last moment, muttering that no one listens to advice until they've learned it the hard way. Historians still argue whether your transformation from ruthless conqueror to wise king was absolute or tempered by the old steel you never fully set down. But anyone who stood beneath the shade of your banyan feasts, drank from a roadside well you ordered dug, or walked past a pillar carrying your words, knows, at least this: the empire you leave behind is softer, fairer, and steadier than the one you inherited. Your health begins to fade. You spend more hours in the gardens wrapped in a simple robe watching the sun lower behind the trees. The palace hums in the distance, but you let it hum without you. Your mind drifts between the past and the present, the sword and the staff, the man you were and the one you became. One evening you sit on a low stone bench beneath a flowering neem tree. The breeze carries the scent of blossoms and the faint echo of temple bells from the city beyond. You close your eyes and hear not the clamour of conquest, but the steady rhythm of the empire's breath, millions of lives safe for now under your watch. And in that quiet you understand, this is the true victory. The story of Ashoka drifts now into stillness, the way a great river slows as it nears the sea. You've walked with him from the restless corridors of youth to the open roads of his later years, felt the weight of his sword and the gentler weight of his compassion. You've stood in the shadow of his stone pillars, listened to the leaves murmur above his banyan councils, and seen how a man who once drowned a kingdom in war could spend the rest of his life planting shade for strangers he would never meet. The palace fades from view now. The torches burn low in their sconces, their flames soft and golden. Outside, the warm night air drifts through the open colonnades, carrying the scents of sandalwood and distant rain. Somewhere deep in the city, a lone flute plays a slow, meandering tune that seems to follow no measure but its own. You imagine yourself walking those same palace gardens. Your hand brushes against the smooth trunk of a young mango tree, the bark cool and slightly damp from the evening dew. The grass beneath your feet is soft, springing back with each step. In the distance, you hear the gentle splash of a fountain, its rhythm slower than your breath. The night deepens. The stars blink awake above the dark silhouettes of the palace roofs. You pause under the vast spread of a banyan tree, its branches hanging low like the arms of an old friend. The air is still except for the whisper of leaves swaying high above you. You settle there, feeling your body grow heavier, anchored in this moment of perfect calm. The worries of your own day, like the quarrels and conquests of Ashoka's early years, begin to loosen their grip. And as you breathe slowly, deeply, you know the truth that came to Ashoka at the end of his long journey. The greatest victories are won in stillness, in patience, and in peace.